Hello, my friends. Welcome back to my channel. My name is David, and today we are continuing part 3 of the Summer of the Silmarils. This is an event that Scott Danielson and Steve Donahue and myself are doing where we are reading through the Silmarillion. We broke it into 4 chunks. Today is part number 3, which is by far the one full of the most interpersonal stories, I believe. Now, I have to finish the 4th part to get a refresher on that, but I'm almost positive because it's got Beren and Luthien and it's got Turin Turambar, and those 2 stories in themselves are so interpersonal and relational in their content that I would be very surprised if the last section outclassed that. In fact, all 4 of the ones that we read today had a lot to do with personal relationships and events and doom and tragedy and war being waged and stealth and all kinds of fun stuff that you would look for in a story. They are in here in the Silmarillion. You just got to go through a really rough patch in the first part of the book. The second part gets a lot better. The third part, I think, is where it's going to peak in terms of what most people will be looking for when they're reading this. But the Silmarillion is not at all like reading The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. The language that Tolkien used is very different. It's more of an archaic. If you read, say, the Bible, it's going to have language a lot closer to what that is. Now, there are translations, of course, of the Bible that forsake some of the more archaic language, and it's not full of these and thous or even anything remotely related to the King James version of the Bible. But it probably would be kind of close to the New King James translation, which is more readable than King James to most people today. So he uses higher language, more flowery and older style of storytelling. And Tolkien himself was a medievalist. He read a lot of older works, just like I prefer to do. And so he takes a lot of inspiration. You see that especially in Turin Turambar, some of that inspiration really coming through with the medieval slant. Beren and Luthien too. Fun fact about Tolkien, him and his wife, their tombstone, his wife has Luthien and Tolkien is Beren. So as you're reading the tale of Beren and Luthien, it's not an exact, he's not imprinting them onto the characters, but in his mind, she was his Luthien and he was her Beren. And that adds an interesting take onto the story as you're reading it. And it's a very tragic story. And so that's the one I'm going to primarily focus on talking about. I'm going to mention briefly some of the other things, but Beren and Luthien by far is the star of the show in here. And so Beren is, I believe, a hunter, and he comes across Luthien, who is an elf. So it's a human and an elf. And Luthien is singing in the forest, and he hears her song and comes across her, and she runs away. And so the next time he hears the song, he's able to get up close and talk to her, and he is in love with her. But of course, being a human and looking at the elf, and not just any elf, she's the daughter of Thingol, which is one of the kings of the elves there. It's not likely that this is ever going to work out, but they both grow to love each other. And have care for each other. And Beren eventually is brought forth in front of her father and asks to marry her, and basically is told, well, if you can go and retrieve one of the Silmarils in your hand, bring it to me, have a Silmaril in your hand when you return, then you can wed my daughter. And of course, all the elves are humored by this because they know that the 3 Silmarils are in the crown of Morgoth, Melkor. He's not going to give those up. You're going to have to go storm up into his stronghold in Angband and steal a Silmaril from his crown and return back with it. And that is something that is not very likely to happen. but he's going to go set out anyway to try. And he goes and he gets captured, as you would expect. Gets tortured by Sauron. And then Luthien hears of what's happening, and so she sets out to go and help him. She makes this magic cloak that whoever touches it falls into a deep sleep of magic. And so she sets out. She encounters a hound named Huan, who is able to go with her. He is the greatest of hounds, and he is destined to only be defeated by the greatest of all wolves. So he knows this prophecy is over his head, and he only speaks 3 times throughout the story, and it says it's foretold that he will only speak 3 times. And so the first time is when he's with Luthien, and then later he will speak a couple more times. And so they set out, they rescue him from his imprisonment, and he's still determined. They realize they have a choice. We can go and try to steal that Silmaril, or she can just, live with him out in the forest, and he can continue to be a woodsman and a hunter, and she can live with him, and she'll be content with that. And he knows that she'll never actually be content with that kind of a life, because that's not a life suited to her. He'd be asking her to give up too much of herself to do that. So they set off to go and take a Silmaril. And they devise a plan, and they go off, and he's under disguise, and Luthien goes up to Melkor, and he recognizes her instantly, and she eventually puts him to sleep with her magic cloak. And so Beron's able to come forth and cut off a Silmaril, and the Silmaril, for most people, it burns them, it hurts them when they hold it, but when he holds it, it feels right. And it feels so right that he gets greedy and decides he's going to take all of the Silmarils instead. And so he goes to cut off a second one off of the crown, and his knife breaks, and it cuts Morgoth, who wakes up, and oh no. Because, of course, you can't have that happy ending. It's got to be a tragic tale. And before this, so when they're rescuing Beron, I forgot to mention, Huan gets to fight against Sauron, who takes the form of a werewolf for the battle. But he is not the greatest of all wolves, is Sauron. So Sauron gets defeated and flees. So that's kind of a cool thing to see Sauron, this necromancer, this magic wizard, this great and powerful being who will one day become the prime evil in Lord of the Rings, take the form of a werewolf and fight and lose. And so they try to steal the Silmaril. They try to cut off a second. It wakes up Morgoth, so they have to flee. Morgoth sends his greatest of wolves after them. And so this is where Huan is going to meet his doom, and they have a great battle. But before that happens, this great wolf bites off the hand of Beron, the one that is holding that Silmaril. And it burns this wolf. And so at that point in time, Huan's been wounded. He's going to die. The hand gets bit off, and the wolf flees in madness because he's just gone insane by all of this pain burning inside of his belly. And so tragedy's going to strike. And this is all skipping a whole bunch of the big stuff in there, but they go back to Thingol, and he says, hey, I'm here with your daughter. I'm here to claim her what you promised me. And the king starts saying, well, I said that you had to have a Silmaril in your hand when you returned. And in a clever twist here, Beron says, well, it is in my hand. My hand, you see, I've got this stump here. My hand is currently inside of the belly of this wolf, and it is holding that Silmaril. I mean, you got to give him props. And so the tragic ending of this story, the wolf comes and rampages, and Beron ends up dying. sad. And Luthien goes and, well, let's just read that part of the tale because it's a wonderful part of the tale. So I misspoke. Huon didn't die in their initial encounter. He dies here fighting the massive wolf. And Beren is going to die because he's got the takes a fierce wound. So they bore back Beren Camlos, son of Barahir, upon a bier of branches with Huon the Wolfhound at his side, and night fell ere they returned to Menegroth. At the feet of Hiralorn, the great beach Luthien met them, walking slow, and some bore torches beside the bier. Then she set her arms around Beren and kissed him, bidding him await her beyond the western sea. And he looked upon her eyes ere the spirit left him, but the starlight was quenched and darkness had fallen, even upon Luthien Tinuville. Thus ended the quest of the Silmaril, but the lay of Luthien, released from bondage, does not end. For the spirit of Beren at her bidding tarried in the halls of Mandos. So Mandos is the Einar of the underworld. Unwilling to leave the world until Luthien came to say her last farewell upon the dim shores of the outer sea, whence men that die set out never to return. But the spirit of Luthien fell down into darkness, and at last it fled, and her body lay like a flower that is suddenly cut off and lies for a while unwithered on the grass. Then a winter, as it were the hoar age of mortal men, fell upon Thingol, but Luthien came to the halls of Mandos, where are the appointed place of the Eldalai, beyond the mansions of the west, upon the confines of the world. There those that wait sit in the shadow of their thought, but her beauty was more than their beauty, and her sorrow deeper than their sorrows, and she knelt before Mandos and sang to him. The song of Luthien before Mandos was the song most fair that ever in words were woven, and the song most sorrowful that ever the world shall hear. Unchanged and perishable is still sung in Valinor beyond the hearing of the world, and listening to the Valar are grieved, for Luthien wove two themes of words, and the sorrow of the Eldar and the grief of men, of the two kindreds that were made by Iluvatar to dwell in Arda, the kingdom of earth amid the innumerable stars. And as she knelt before him, her tears fell upon his feet like rain upon the stones. And Mandos was moved to pity, who never before was so moved, nor has ever since. Therefore he summoned Beren, and even as Luthien had spoken in the hour of his death, they met again beyond the western sea. But Mandos had no power to withhold the spirits of men that were dead within the confines of the world, and after their time of waiting, nor could he change the fates of the children of Iluvatar. He went therefore to Manwë, lord of the Valar, who governed the world under the hand of Iluvatar, and Manwë sought counsel in his innermost thought, where the will of Iluvatar was revealed. These were the choices that he gave to Luthien. Because of her labors and her sorrow, she should be released from Mandos and to go to Valimar, there to dwell until the world's end among the Valar, forgetting all griefs that her life had known. Thither Beren could not come, for it was not permitted to the Valar to withhold death from him, which is the gift of Iluvatar to men. But the other choice was this, that she might return to Middle-earth and take with her Beren, there to dwell again, but without certitude of life or joy. Then she would become mortal, and subject to a second death, even as he, and ere long she would leave the world forever, and her beauty become only a memory and song. This doom she chose, forsaking the blessed realm, and putting aside all claim to kinship with those that dwelt there, that thus whatever grief might lie in wait, the fates of Beren and Luthien might be joined, and their paths lead together beyond the confines of the world. So it was that alone of the Eldalai she has died indeed, and left the world long ago, yet in her choice the two kindreds have been joined, and she is the forerunner of many in whom the Eldar yet, though all the world is changed, the likeness of Luthien, the beloved whom they have lost. So Beren and Luthien is a wonderful story. I enjoy it tremendously. The next story in there of the fifth battle, Nirnanath, Arnoriad, is really fun. It's big battles. They're waging war against Melkor, and they think in this battle they're going to be able to finally defeat him and his forces, and he empties all of his stronghold. And it even says in here that they would have won, but for men. For there is a betrayal by, I believe it's the Southern Easterling folks, and they turn upon their allies and wreak great slaughter against them. And all end up having to flee, but the last of all are the dwarves, who hold back and face down a dragon and are able to allow their friends to retreat. And it's a great chapter of battles. And then we get of Turin Turambar, where it returns once again to a kind of interpersonal, humanized story. And the remarkable part about this is there is a great dragon who plays a big part in the story. This dragon, I want to make sure I give the right name because there's a lot of dragons. Glaurung, who puts great spells and is able to make people freeze in place and is able to wipe their memories and do all sorts of things with his gaze. And that sets up a big tragic moment in which Turin Turambar is held captive, and his sister, whom he is urged by this dragon to go and rescue, his mother, his sister gets her whole memory wiped, so she knows not who she is. She does not remember her name. She can't speak. And she basically stands immobile until somebody takes her hand and moves along with her. And Turin Turambar goes and runs across this gal who he doesn't recognize because he's been away fighting battles. He's got this black sword that just is evil and able to deal great slaughter and consumes orcs, and he has tragic moments where he fatally wounds friends. But the most tragic of all of his things, because if you remember Feanor, the guy who crafted the Silmarils, made vows and had curses cast upon him that him and all of his children shall be cursed to foul fates, and that's a lot of what's driving this. Turin Turambar is one of his descendants, and you see this doom that he tries to leave behind him by even changing his name for a while, and it still pursues him. And he thinks that it's because his true name gets spoken, but really it's just because that's what's hanging around him and following him. And he falls in love with his sister, not knowing it's his sister, and she falls in love with him, not knowing that he's her brother, and they have a child, and she's pregnant with this child. And when the dragon is sought after to finally be vanquished, and taking a page out of Norse stories, Turin and a friend go and hide in a ravine, and the dragon's going over, and his friend dies because of stone falls on him, but he's able to stab up into his soft underbelly, and it's a mortal wound to the dragon. And of course, Turin can't help but gloat and pronounces who it was that defeated you, this dragon that has now been slain. And he pulls out his sword and gets splashed with a very vile blood that basically knocks him out. And his sister at this time comes and finds him. She's able to speak a little bit, but still doesn't have her memory, and sees him and sees the dragon, and the dragon raises its head, it wasn't completely dead, and pronounces that she'll remember who she is, and she hears the greatest of dooms and how vile this is, and she remembers that this is who she is and that this is her brother, and what they've done all retains to her. And so she kills herself, and thinking that Turin's also dead. And it's a tragic moment. And then Turin wakes up and sees what's happened and is told what the dragon pronounced, because somebody was nearby to hear it, somebody that coveted his sister and was jealous because, well, He stole her from him, and so Turin falls upon his sword and thus dies as well. It's a very, very tragic tale. I'm not doing it any justice because there's so much in that story. It's, I think, the longest of the stories. Beren and Luthien and Turin Turambar are the two longer tales in this, and they're both great. Both of them have individual volumes that Christopher Tolkien has released, varying versions that Tolkien wrote and rewrote, and notes and commentaries. And both of them are outstanding to read, to dive more into these two great characters. So I don't want to keep this going for too much longer. These four stories were outstanding. I didn't even talk about the first one. This is top 5 book for me, easily. It's one of my favorite books. It's not an easy book. It's not an easy read. It's slow going. It's a slow burn, but it's got so many great moments in there. It's got a lot of storytelling that is very different than the conventional type of storytelling. So if you enjoy the type of storytelling that you find in here, you may find a greater appreciation for medieval works and other tales around that time. If not, then you may not be as big of a fan of things like Beowulf and other great stories, and that's a shame. I'm looking forward to part 4, to getting through the Silmarillion. I'm going to have an announcement coming up, I believe, tomorrow, assuming I can find time to make the video, where I'm going to announce basically my plans for the rest of the year for Inklings. So my Inkling along, my plan for Medieval Monthlies. And not only am I rolling through the rest of this year, but also through June of 2022. It's big plans with Tolkien starting December. Big plans with Tolkien. So thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying the Silmarillion, whether you're rereading it, reading it for the first time, or just watching because you've read it before and are enjoying what Scott Danielson and Steve Donahue are doing alongside. I've valued tremendously Scott's perspective as a newcomer. I'm excited to see his video today to find out how he took this third act out of the 4 in the book, because I think he's going to hopefully have enjoyed it far more than the 2 parts that came before. And of course, Steve Donahue is going to have all kinds of great insights. I'm not worthy to meet the level of discussion that he provides because he's just such a talented reader. He's able to express things in a much better way than I can and recap things, and he catches things that even I missed on my reread here. So thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying this. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing more of these types of things in the future.